The night Sarah called him at midnight, Daniel Harding realized that sometimes the people you think you know best are the ones who surprise you the most. Daniel was 38, a furniture restorer who worked out of a converted barn just outside Portland. He had been divorced for 3 years from a woman who had loved the idea of a craftsman until she realized that craftsmanship meant sawdust and deadlines and quiet evenings rather than gallery openings. He had made peace with it. He ran his business, restored old tables and chairs that people thought were beyond saving, and spent his evenings reading in a house that smelled like linseed oil and cedar. He was content, or at least he had convinced himself that he was. Sarah Bennett had been his best friend since college. They had met in an art history elective, bonded over terrible coffee and a shared appreciation for professors who talked too much, and had somehow managed to stay close even as their lives pulled them in different directions. She had moved to Seattle, started a career in nonprofit work, and gotten engaged to a man named Preston Clark, a software architect with a polished resume and an even more polished smile. Daniel had met Preston twice. Both times, Preston had talked about optimization and scalability as though relationships were systems that could be debugged. Daniel had smiled, nodded, and said nothing. The wedding was tomorrow. Daniel had driven up that afternoon, checked into a hotel near the venue, and spent the evening reviewing his best man speech. It was short, warm, and carefully constructed to avoid mentioning anything that might complicate the evening. He had just turned off the light when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. He answered without thinking. "If you're calling to make sure I have the rings, I do. They're in the jacket pocket. I checked 3 times. There was a pause on the other end, and then Sarah's voice came through, quiet and unsteady. I can't do this." Daniel sat up, wide awake now. "Sarah, what's going on?" "I can't marry him," she said. The words came out fast, as though she had been holding them in for too long. "I've been trying to convince myself for months that I was just nervous, that this was normal, but it's not. I don't love him the way I should, and I think he knows. I think he's known for a while, and we've both just been pretending." Asuri andosirs. Daniel stood, pulled on a shirt, and grabbed his keys. "Where are you?" "At the house. Preston's staying at his brother's place tonight. Tradition, you know." Her laugh was hollow. "I'm sitting in the kitchen staring at the seating chart and realizing I don't want any of this." "I'm coming over," Daniel said. "Don't do anything until I get there." The drive took 18 minutes. The house was a renovated Craftsman in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine. Daniel parked in the driveway and found Sarah sitting on the front porch steps, wrapped in an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She looked up when he approached, and her eyes were red but dry. "You got here fast," she said. "You sounded like you needed someone who wasn't going to tell you to sleep on it." Daniel sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Talk to me. What happened?" Sarah stared out at the street where a neighbor's porch light flickered against the dark. "Nothing happened. That's the problem. Preston is a good man. He's kind. He's stable. He's exactly the kind of person you're supposed to marry when you're 34 and tired of dating. My parents love him. My friends think I'm lucky. And I've been telling myself that love is a choice, that passion fades, that what matters is partnership." She turned to look at Daniel. "But I don't think I've ever actually been in love with him. I think I've been in love with the idea of being settled." Daniel didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, the way he did when he was working on a piece of furniture that had been damaged and needed to be understood before it could be fixed. Finally he said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to call it off," Sarah said, "but I don't know how. The venue is paid for. The guests are already in town. My mother is going to lose her mind. And Preston," she stopped, her voice catching. "Preston doesn't deserve to be humiliated. Understaken sender I." He also doesn't deserve to marry someone who doesn't love him, Daniel said quietly. Neither do you. Sarah looked at him and something shifted in her expression. How do you always know what to say? I don't. I just know you. Atinena. Daniel reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. And I know that if you go through with this tomorrow, you're going to regret it. Not because Preston is a bad guy, but because you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd been honest. Sarah's grip tightened. Will you stay with me? I need to call him. I need to tell him tonight. I can't let him wake up tomorrow thinking everything is fine. I'll stay as long as you need, Daniel said. They went inside. The house was pristine, the kind of clean that suggested it had been staged for the wedding rather than lived in. Sarah made coffee even though it was nearly 1 in the morning, and Daniel sat at the kitchen table while she paced, rehearsing what she was going to say. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed. Preston answered on the second ring. Sarah, is everything okay? Daniel could hear the edge of concern in his voice, the reflexive caretaking that probably came naturally to a man who approached life like a project plan. Preston, I need to talk to you, Sarah said. Her voice was steady now, calmer than it had been on the porch. I can't marry you tomorrow. I'm so sorry. I should have said this months ago, but I kept hoping I was wrong, and I wasn't. This isn't fair to you, and it's not fair to me, and I can't keep pretending. There was a long pause. When Preston spoke again, his voice was tight. Is this about Daniel? Sarah blinked, surprised. What? You called him. Before you called me. Preston's tone was measured, but Daniel could hear the anger underneath. I've always known you two were close. Maybe too close. This has nothing to do with Daniel, Sarah said, and Daniel could see the way her jaw tightened, the flash of frustration in her eyes. Anstanden edesil. This is about the fact that I don't love you the way you deserve to be loved. That's not Daniel's fault. It's mine. Right. Preston exhaled sharply. I'll call the venue in the morning. You can handle your family. The line went dead. Sarah set the phone down on the counter and stared at it, her hands trembling. Daniel stood and crossed the room, and when he reached her, she turned and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. She didn't cry. She just stood there, breathing slowly as though she were trying to remember how to exist in her own skin. He's going to tell people I left him for you, she said quietly. Maybe, Daniel said. Does it matter? It matters because it's not true. Daniel didn't answer. The truth was more complicated than that, and they both knew it. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah made the calls. Her mother first, who cried and asked how she could do this to the family. Her sister, who was furious and then, unexpectedly, relieved. Her maid of honor, who said she had been worried but didn't want to overstep. By the time the sun started to rise, Sarah looked exhausted but lighter, as though she had been carrying something heavy for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I should let you get some sleep, Daniel said. You've had a long night. Sarah looked at him, and there was something in her expression that he couldn't quite name. Can I ask you something? After tonight, I feel like I should be nervous. You probably should. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Why didn't you ever say anything? Daniel went still. About what? About us. About the fact that you've been in love with me since college. The words hung in the air between them, too big to ignore and too true to deny. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to hide it. Because you were happy, or at least I thought you were. And I didn't want to be the guy who ruined that. I wasn't happy, Sarah said softly. I was safe. There's a difference. Daniel didn't know who moved first. Maybe it didn't matter. One moment they were standing in the kitchen with the early morning light spilling through the window, and the next her hand was on his chest and his fingers were tangled in her hair, and they were kissing in a way that felt like the answer to a question neither of them had been brave enough to ask. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was smiling for the first time all night. For the record, she said, I'm not made of glass. I'd seen Kersey. Daniel laughed, the sound low and surprised. Noted. They spent the rest of the morning together, drinking coffee and talking about everything except the wedding that wasn't going to happen. By the time Daniel drove back to the hotel to check out, the city was awake and moving, and he felt like he had stepped into a version of his life that he had imagined but never believed in. 3 days later, Sarah called him again. Preston's brother just posted something on social media. He's saying I had an affair. That I'm a liar. That you were the reason I called it off. Daniel sat down on the edge of his workbench, a half-sanded chair frame in front of him. Well, what do you want to do about it? I don't know. Part of me wants to set the record straight. Part of me thinks it doesn't matter what people believe. It matters if it hurts you, Daniel said, but I'm not going anywhere. Let them say what they want. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You're really okay with this? With people thinking you're the villain? Aster di nensirbi stipmindats. Ding di dan nasir asirin I. I'd rather be the villain in their story than the coward in ours. 6 months later, Sarah moved to Portland. She found a job with a local nonprofit, rented a small apartment near Daniel's workshop, and slowly rebuilt her life in a way that felt like hers. They didn't rush. They had coffee on Sunday mornings, took long walks along the river, and learned each other in a way they had never been able to before. The first time she stayed over, she woke up to find Daniel in the kitchen making breakfast, and she realized that this was what she had been missing all along. Not perfection, not safety, just someone who saw her and stayed. A year after that, Daniel proposed in the same barn where he restored furniture, with sawdust on the floor and late afternoon light streaming through the windows. He didn't get down on one knee. He just took her hand and said, I don't need you to be anything other than exactly who you are, and I'd really like to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Sarah said yes without hesitation. They were married in a small ceremony at a state park with 20 people and a friend who officiated, and vows that they wrote themselves. There were no seating charts, no optimization plans, no polished smiles. Just two people who had finally stopped pretending and started living. What would you have done if your best friend called you the night before their wedding and said they couldn't go through with it? And have you ever realized that the person you needed was standing next to you the whole time? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.